welcome to the Pocket, episode 2. I'm way too excited for this. We are all things Final Four, NCAA Final Four. We got a couple of stories too that we want to talk about, but really we want to get into these teams that have made it to Final Four weekend. And really the big story that we want to start talking about first is the fact that Maryland men, 10 consecutive years other than COVID in 2020, and then losing to Army in the quarterfinals of 2023. I mean, 10 times in 12 years. And we can say the same thing about Acacia Walker and the Boston College Eagles. This is going to be their 8th consecutive trip to Final Four weekend. Different for Boston College, if they make it to Sunday, which is their championship day, then it's their 8th consecutive trip to the championship game, having won 2 out of the 7 that they've played in. I mean, my mind is sort of a little bit blown with the fact that those statistics exist.
Yeah, on both men and women's side, it's just crazy to think. Speaking first about Acacia, I love her to death. I know her personally. Our kids went to the Sherwood Forest camp together.
Of course they did, because every great lacrosse coach sends their kids to the Sherwood Forest camp.
She is just an amazing person and just so upbeat, but to go to that many Final Fours in a row and then to have a chance to, I think you said the 8th in a row for a championship game is just unbelievable. And, going for her second consecutive is just pretty cool. And obviously her players are almost an extension of her, and you see how bright they are, see how happy they are to play the game, how excited, energetic. And then when you watch her, she doesn't seem to ever get rattled. Whenever they pan over to her and her staff, she just seems to be in complete and total control at all times. And I think that her kids play that way. When you look at last year's championship, the save, and we mentioned this last time, but the save that was just unreal. But it was like, that was like a rattle moment for a child or for a person to be in, and the moment didn't get to him, and she was able to make that save just like it was like every day in practice. So very, very cool, and I hope that they get it done. And then flipping to the boys' side, Maryland is just unbelievable. I mean, I get a little bit emotional about it, talking about them, my kid. I have great friends on the staff. But for them to have another chance to go back to a championship game, I don't even know how many this would be for Tills, but to be there 10 times since 2011 is just absolutely unreal.
Well, one of the things you mentioned specifically about Tills, and I actually think this probably goes hand in hand with a lot of these, clearly the 4 boys programs that have made it and the 4 women's programs that have made it, but his motto, I think, is be the best. And it's something that you've been able to experience because your son is playing for him at Maryland right now. How do you think he instills that in all of those guys? I mean, they've got a staff of, 4 coaches, a dolo, and there's like 50 boys. So like, how is that something that they are able to do as a staff on a daily basis? Because I feel the same way about Acacia staff. I feel the same way about Kelly Monty-Hiller and her staff, Gary at Syracuse, and Jeff Tamburni at Penn State. Like, how do they set these mottos, whether it's different every year or the same motto over and over and over again, and really help these kids live it?
Yeah, the first phrase that comes to mind would be attention to detail. They say all the time that if you give Tills a week, good luck. But because my son Spencer's at Maryland and I have some other close friends that are there that I was able to coach in the club ranks and in high school, that their attention to detail is from A to Z. They are so dialed in, and I believe that their leadership then kind of extends down to the players, and their senior and junior leadership has been unlike anything that I've seen. Obviously, we all went to college. We played big-time lacrosse or sports, and leadership was good in different places, but I've never seen anything like this. I mean, when you're talking about their social lives, the seniors make sure that the freshmen are taken care of and that they're back in their dorms at a certain point. And that just never happened when I was in college. But for them to care that much to the point where they would walk them back to their dorms and make sure that they understood, how they live and how they kind of presented themselves for the University of Maryland, for the University of Maryland men's lacrosse team, it's unlike anything that I've seen. And I said this to my wife, and I think I said it to you yesterday, was my son left a child and he came home a man. And I was one of the ones that I didn't want him to redshirt. I thought he was good enough to play. One of my main messages to Coach Phipps was like, we're very, very close friends. I don't have to agree with everything, but I'm going to follow your lead. And I actually sent him a note the other day just thanking him. He's like, I'm not sure I like the nice Spencer, but I really do appreciate it. But it means so much to know that your kid goes out on his own. He's never faced adversity in his life. And he gets into this college situation, which is already hard enough. And then you add athletics and living on your own and all these different things. And now the red shirt comes in. Well, you can compete and you can help. But for him to leave a child, come back a man was just so rewarding for both Lindsay and myself that I couldn't thank the staff and the players enough.
Well, you talk about the red shirt, and I think, we can probably have an entire episode of the podcast on the transfer portal and still never come to any agreements on it. But one of the things that hasn't recently come out, but has been specifically to you and younger Spence Squared, Spence Jr., what are we calling him, by the way? Little Spence, okay. And one of his teammates, Jack Dowd, who have sort of been seen as the scout specialists for this Maryland program. So this week, Little Spence is literally mimicking Little Spallina, because, there's a big Spallina, Joey Spallina from Syracuse. And it's really important, not only to him, to the coaches, but how the rest of the team views him this week and how he's prepping the starting defense for Maryland. Do you want to talk about how that's come about and how that's viewed from both Little Spence's standpoint as well as the coaches as well as the rest of the team?
Yeah, it seems like you would think of it as a thankless job, and there's probably times where each one of the boys that are on the scout team, probably think to themselves, "Am I good enough? Am I ever going to get a chance? Am I really providing anything, any substance or anything for this team?" And when you read the article, which was pretty awesome, it really, a light bulb went off in my head where I was extremely thankful. But after the first Syracuse game, Will Schaller came up to me and gave me a hug and said, "Your boy was amazing this week, and it really helped us get ready." And so to think about that entire scout team, which is probably 10 or 15 players deep, maybe they think at times I'm not worth it, I'm not going to ever be part of that. But they put their nose down, they work their tail off, they study film on the opposition, and then it's their job to go out and do their best to make the Maryland defense or the Maryland offense better. And they've done that. And I think that kind of goes back to what we first said, was that be the best, is that it doesn't matter what number you are on the roster. Your importance is of great value to everyone there. They treat everyone the same. They hang out in huge groups. And so it's been very, very helpful for them. And it's been an easy transition to go from, one of the best players in high school lacrosse to being on a scout team and having to do that every single day, where most people's reward is the game day on Saturday. Or hopefully in this case will be a game day on Monday.
And we need to start normalizing that it's normal to go from being the best player on your high school team to then a scout player. That is normal. What is not normal is going from being your best player on your high school team to your best player on your college team. Yes, it does happen, but it's not normal. And I think really want to bring up the other individual that was mentioned in that article, Jack Dowd, who was a transfer from Salisbury, transferring in for probably his last year of eligibility and not really getting the chance to play because of the other players that Maryland had. And one of the things, instead of crying and whining, he sort of was like, okay, this is my job this year, and this is how I get my team to get that ring. I think that's really interesting because most individuals probably wouldn't take that outlook on the situation that they've been given.
Yeah, 100%. You think about the ego that all of us have as athletes, and I mean, it's tremendous. And to come from being the best player at Salisbury, and I'm not sure if they won it last year, but I think that they did, and they did not win it. Okay, but they got pretty far. But at the end of the day, here's a kid that's putting up major goal scoring numbers for who we believe to be probably the greatest Division III school of all time. And then transferring in to spend his final year at the University of Maryland, which obviously has great success as well. And just to be able to kind of tuck all that in and say, okay, like whatever my role is going to be on this team, I'm going to do it with my head up, with a smile on my face, with great effort and energy. And I'm going to do my part in helping this group win us a championship. And I mean, it's just, it takes an egoless person to go in there and swallow their pride and to be able to do that. Because at the end of the day, all these kids can play.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's what I think the best part about it is, like, I just find it so cool that like a 22, 23-year-old can step away and say, okay, this is my job. This was my job. This is now my new job. And this is how I help my teammates and do that fun stuff. All right, so let's talk about some of these matchups for this weekend. I mean, I'm going to start on the girls' side because I do think there was a little bit different of a play out in the quarterfinals than we had seen before. Most of these teams made it in pretty smoothly. North Carolina beating Princeton pretty handedly. I got to talk to Courtney Connor this morning, who got to cover that game, and she's like, Princeton, they 100% deserve to be there. They just looked a little scared. And unfortunately, they drew North Carolina. Boston College beating Yale pretty handily. It was a little touch and go there in the first half. And then Maryland and Penn and Northwestern. Like, whew. And then Duke and Florida. I mean, Penn Northwestern, the score does not show the amount of nails that I was biting in that game, because I was like, oh my God, is Penn going to upset Northwestern? And Duke and Florida, like the closest of the games. What we didn't have this week was the 4 games that went down to like the last 2 minutes of the 4 quarters, like the men. But anything pop out at you from those games with regards to the women's programs?
Yeah, I mean, for the women, you would just tend to think that Northwestern, Boston College, Carolina are going to advance. It's a shame that there wasn't a couple minutes left in that Florida-Duke game, because, Florida just jumped out on them in the first half. And then all of a sudden you're watching and there's another goal and another goal and another goal and another goal, and they just ran out of time.
Well, I mean, and we could compare Florida-Duke potentially to Penn State Notre Dame on the boys' side, but the shock that Notre Dame felt, Florida was able to maybe answer that shock that they were feeling from Duke. And as clearly when we move over to talking about the boys, like, that's going to become a big topic.
I mean, when watching halftime and seeing the young ladies talk about Duke and how they don't give up. I think O'Leary was saying, this is not over. This is a team that's not going to quit no matter what the score is. And then they came out and they jumped after them. Really jumped after them, and they were just dominating, and Florida was just hanging on in that heat. And so kudos to them for hanging on and getting the ability to advance. But flipping to Penn State, Notre Dame, is that name one person in the country that is looking back at an 8-3 halftime score in Notre Dame's favor that's saying Notre Dame's going to lose this game. There wasn't one announcer that said it.
I think a lot of us felt sick.
Yeah.
A lot of us felt sick. And we waited. And probably, and again, I have no idea, haven't talked to Kevin Corrigan or anybody from that staff, but we were all just like, okay, Notre Dame's going to wake up at some point. Notre Dame's going to wake up at some point. And, goal 12, goal 13, and then goal 14 for Penn State, Trainer being involved in almost all of them. I mean, the air gate, backhanded air gate. It wasn't even a front-handed air gate. It was a backhanded air gate and landing outside the crease. I mean, that's when I was like, oh, bleep. I mean, I can't say it. Like, oh my gosh. But I look back at Florida, who's now going to be marked up against North Carolina. I'm pretty open that I think that Teresa Bragg from Florida is like one of the best defenders in the country right now. I'm a little scared with her defense going against Carolina's offense, because they just move the ball so much quicker. And then Boston College Northwestern being a matchup from the national championship game last year. If you remember correctly, or if I remember correctly, or if other people in the room help me remember correctly, Boston College was down against Northwestern in the national championship game last year by 6.
Yeah.
And they came back and won. Where are these comebacks coming from? Like, we haven't seen a lot of this in the lacrosse world. This year specifically, we can probably name 7 or 8 games on either the men's or the women's side where these comebacks are like gargantuan in nature, and the other team has either a response or zero response. But I'm excited to see what Rachel Clark and Boston College can do, and clearly Northwestern. I mean, all of these teams have so many different players that can make an impact. That I'm excited. I mean, what are your predictions here? Can we make some predictions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think talking about draw control and goalie play, I think especially in that Northwestern BC game is going to be crucial. Both teams can score, both teams can defend. Both teams are tremendously coached, but I do believe that the team that wins the most draws and gets the better goalie play usually is the team that's going to advance. So we'll have to see how that thing plays out.
Now remember, Northwestern's goalkeeper is Schweitzer, who was the Syracuse goalkeeper.
Right.
And we have Dolce back. So that's going to be really interesting. I think that both Acacia and Kelly Monte are very draw focused. That's something that I think Florida is going to have to really focus on this week to be able to match Carolina.
Yeah.
But we're talking about 4 sick goalies and draw specialists who know what to do.
Yeah, I don't see, when you think Carolina, Florida, if I were a betting man, I'm taking Carolina. I just think that they're tremendous.
100%.
I think that everything they do from top to bottom is unreal. Their pace is unreal. Their offensive skill is unreal. The way that they play defense and swarm is unreal. They, to me, are going to be in the championship game. I love Acacia. I'd like to see BC get back. Yeah. I don't see a high-scoring game. I could be absolutely wrong, but I don't see a high-scoring game. And watching the Maryland Northwestern game in the Big Ten championship, that was tough. It was a 5 or 6-2 lead for Maryland, and they were able to win a low-scoring game. So, I don't know which route I'd take there. So I'm going to just go with BC just because of Dolce.
Yeah, I think both coaches, prepping wise, are going to be really interesting to see how they come out on Friday. I think the other wrinkle that's really interesting this particular year is that this is the first year, I don't know if ever, people in the room help me with this, is this the first year ever that the men's and women's lacrosse national championships are being played the same weekend at the same venue?
I think it's
Yeah.
If not, it's one of 2 or maybe 3.
Yeah, so how does that wrinkle play in with girls' games happening on Friday, semifinals Friday, semifinals for the boys Saturday, girls' championship on Sunday? Does that sort of play a big part in this? I don't know. I'm going to go with North Carolina against BC, not because I just think that North Carolina has more firing power, specifically to Florida. I think that I would say the same thing about Boston College, which is what makes me think that Boston College is going to win that game. And then we've got to pick a national champion because we're not going to be able to.
The 2 that you just mentioned, they've been the best 2 in the league all year long. They've been very good. I think one thing that comes into play of 3 of the 4 schools is when you think BC, Northwestern, and Carolina, the pressure of the big moment, that is out the window because they've all been to so many big moment games. They've all played on this stage many times. They've all been successful. So that kind of goes out the window. So obviously these are all tremendous coaches, but I think it's going to be the players. They're going to have to, one player or 2 players are going to have to really shine and be above the rest. I do have Carolina going. I have them playing BC. I'm taking BC.
Oh.
3rd time's a charm.
Okay. Well, when you say 3rd time's the charm, that was the point that I was going to bring up. North Carolina beat them regular season. North Carolina beat them ACC championships. Can North Carolina win the game? 3 in one season is really hard to do. I'm struggling with this one because I want it to be BC, and that's purely for my relationship with Acacia and that program and sort of what she's done with that program. Although I love Jenny Levy and the North Carolina program, I think because of my time playing at Virginia, I just don't like North Carolina. Has nothing to do with any of the current players on the team. Has nothing to do with the coaching staff. Just like I don't like Maryland.
Well, that's not okay.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. And speaking of Maryland, let's start talking about the boys
Because they
now.
win.
I know, and I'm okay. I mean, I hate it because I like winning, and I'm super competitive, and I lost to Maryland. So that's why I still take their calls, though.
The world needs second place people.
Oh, that's so wrong. I'm going to say so many nasty things about you in my head right now. Okay, on to the men. All right.
This be a good one.
My spiders.
That was
Oh, that was
a
the
tough
hardest
one.
thing for me all weekend because
It's really tough to see a team that, unless you've watched the whole season, Richmond was in a position twice against everybody's best team in the country. And they had it, and it was one of those things where it's almost like you snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. And it was such great games to watch, the one in the regular season that they played, and Cornell had to come all the way back and steal a victory, and then the same thing happened. I mean, just watching, and I was on my phone because my son had a game, but I'm just getting score updates, and it was like, here they come, here they come, here they come. And, but again, kudos to Coach Shamati for coaching a heck of a season, a heck of a team. Those guys believed in him and his
they
staff
totally
and
do.
each other. But Cornell has just been tremendous. And the one thing that Cornell can do that many haven't been able to do this year is they can score in bunches in very little time. If they need 5 in 2 minutes, done. They just have those players. And it's not just one. CJ's been the best player in the country all year long. He's been tremendous. But Ryan Goldstein was phenomenal.
First of all, I loved watching him play. Talk about one of the smaller players in the NCAA who packs like one of the biggest punches. Yeah. It was so fun to watch him. Specifically, the crease work was what I was really interested in watching him play. But, I have a special place for Richmond in my heart because of the time that I spent coaching there. And watching them sort of on that stage was a whole nother, and I really wanted Little John to get involved in like that third and fourth quarter. He was taken out by Cornell because they did a good job scouting, but I really wanted him to get involved because I wanted to see the Spiders goes on. But I'm super pumped for Cornell, and they are gonna have to go up against. I mean, do we talk about it now? Penn State and Notre Dame.
Well, we could.
How
How about the fact that Cornell had one loss in the regular season?
To Richmond. No, to Penn State. Okay, well, first of all, we got to talk about Penn State Notre Dame. Okay. At one point, it was 12-6, and then you blinked, and it was 14-12, and the game was over. What goes through your head as a coach? Like, what was Kevin Corrigan thinking when he in my opinion, he called the timeouts when he needed to. It looked like he was making adjustments, and then there was just like no response.
Yeah, watching it up close, it was one of those things where you're right. Obviously, Coach Corrigan is one of the best in the game at what he does. He's proved that over the last several years. Again, the pressure of being in a big moment game does not affect Notre Dame because they've been in so many. It looked to me when I went in and I was watching it at 8-3 as they started to come back. I think it was like 11-5 or 11-6 at one point. And then that's when it just looked like Penn State was playing so much harder than
Like
what
the
Notre
switch got
Dame was.
turned on.
Not even that Notre Dame wasn't playing hard, it was that what they were like able to do. Like they just weren't able to get to that next level that Penn State got to. And how Penn State got to it in the second half. So I mean, you think about Notre Dame, you think about Jerry Burns' defense, how good those guys always are year in and year out. They always get good goalie play. They have one of the best face-off guys in the country. You have a 5-goal cushion at halftime, and then you also have a 5-goal cushion later on in the game. Nobody on that Notre Dame fan base, nobody on that Notre Dame sideline was thinking this could be a comeback. It wasn't that they weren't playing, because they played hard throughout. It's just that Penn State had every bounce. Their offense was clicking. They were as physical as you could possibly be. They just seemed to just gain and control the excitement of the day, and it helped them kind of.
Well, we talked about it last week, this sort of momentum shift that Penn State not only took advantage of, but then like held on to for the longevity of the game.
Yeah.
It was absolutely crazy.
There's a freshman at Penn State right now that went to the Severn School in Annapolis. His name is Reed Gills. He's a face-off guy. He's one of the best 2024s in the country. Played for me with the Crabs. But this is a kid that in the Big Ten semis and championships set records as a freshman for face-off wins and I think ground ball play. And then one of the things that was very helpful for Penn State against Notre Dame is that it wasn't that they were getting every single face-off, but the ones that were absolutely crucial were in their pocket. Like they had them and then they could play. So Penn State could go on a 3-goal run because they were getting the ball back and because of their energy and the excitement of the day and the Penn State crowd just going bananas. It just seemed like it was really easy for them. And the kid trainer was just outrageous. He was just really, really good.
I mean, he was so good. He's from PA. I think he's from Malvern Prep in PA. Did I hear that correctly?
I don't know if he went to prep.
Anyway, he was just good. Okay, then there's this other side of the Final Four for the men. So we've got Cornell playing Penn State, and then we've got Maryland playing Cuse.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't lie, because I hope to never lie on this.
Cheer for Gary.
Of all the, well, yes, I'm cheering for Gary, but of all the quarterfinal games, the Maryland Georgetown game just wasn't a fun game. Now, I understand that style of play. I get that. The Syracuse-Princeton game, it's an upset, right? That was an upset. I know you're talking about 3 playing 6.
No, I don't. When we're talking about Syracuse, the team that they have on both ends of the field, they have the best face-off guy in the country. I don't see that as being an upset. I do know that Princeton was hot, playing really, really good lacrosse, but that's a tough cover. It's hard if you're going to go and try to match point for point with Syracuse. That's just their bread and butter. I mean, have they been great at it the last few years? Probably not. But when you think back at those 22 straight Final Fours, they were willing to beat a team 22-21. They didn't care. It was just that's what it called for that day, and so that's what they were doing. But I thought that they did a really, really good job of. Joey Spallina was terrific. He had 4 and 4 in the game. And they get the faceoffs when needed. They get good defensive play when it's needed. You look at a 1918 game and you're like, okay, goalie sold separately, defense sold separately. But at the end of the day, when stops were called for, Syracuse came about and made them. And then they were able to hang on. I mean, they kept giving the ball back and forth, and they were able to hang on. So I think the Georgetown Maryland game, I think that the coaching staffs know each other so well. They're very close. They scrimmage each other before the spring starts. They are, as I said, very, very close. They talk to each other often. They know each other, very, very well. And so I think it was a defensive struggle. It seemed like it was very tough for both teams to get through and crack the opposition. And then when you look at the goalie play on both sides, Anderson Moore at Georgetown is very, very good and very active. And then you look at Logan, and Logan's just been tremendous all year. So it's, I think.
And they both had to do a lot outside of the cage, which they both had to start almost clearing the ball for their teams, which I found to be really interesting because it's not something that you typically see.
I think it's, absolutely with the goalies, like they were definitely getting out of the cage and they were doing really, really good things with it. Anderson Moore he's extremely crafty when he gets across the midfield line, like he's really good. He's a goalie that can actually score. But Logan is just very cerebral and understands where the ball is, where he's got to get to, and then he can get to his outlet. It was just, when you think about it, I think I said it before with the Syracuse-Princeton game, what the game called for, what Georgetown and Maryland, the game called for was, a low-scoring game. And if you look all the way back, if teams are going to get into a low-scoring game with the University of Maryland, their chances are not very, very good. And that doesn't mean that you can't win and that you're not better on a certain day, but they have been very, very good at taking away the opposition's best and then doing more than just enough on the offensive end. Their defense has been terrific. Their goalie's been terrific all game. They get faceoffs when needed. Their shorty play's been really good. And if you look at their stats, they don't have one guy that's up at 80, 90 points. They have 8 guys that are at 30, 40, 50 points. And to me, that's winning lacrosse.
Yeah. So now we talk about Maryland going into Syracuse. And by going in, I've been just going into that game. And are there anything you specifically see on either side of that's for Syracuse, for Maryland?
I think on the Syracuse side, they have a tremendous face-off guy. I think Maryland did a pretty good job in the early part of the season to kind of negate that and did pretty well at the face-off. I think you'll see the Mullins kid be very, very good this weekend. And then, you have to look at Maryland's defense and their ability to game plan. They have a full week to prepare for Syracuse, who has been playing top-dollar lacrosse. They thrive off of winning, higher scoring games. And I think that, Coach Jesse Bernhardt and Coach Tills are putting in schemes to, try to eliminate that, to try to keep it into like a 12-8, 12-9 type game.
Wow.
And then what Coach Phipps has been able to do on the offensive end with some really high-level players, he's getting just maximum effort out of everybody, which is key. I mean, Maryland plays the game as 6 and 7 on the defensive end, 6 on the offensive end, 7 on the defensive end, and to me, they do it better than anybody.
So clearly, you're picking Maryland.
I would love to see Maryland play well. I would like to see Billy Dwan have a good game because I love him to death.
Yeah.
And I want to see Joey do well, but yeah, I want Maryland.
You want Maryland? Okay, so Cornell, Penn State. Who you picking?
Well, I coached 2 of the kids that are on Penn State. I love John Haas, who's a Terp. And so I am going to go with I'd like to see Penn State win. I want to see Alex Ross, who wears number 6 for Penn State.
Yep.
I want to see Reed Gills play very well. And I have a couple other guys that are freshmen there, and Andrew Beard. And then also Hayes Schreiner is also there. And the D-Bar Tolomeo kids are there. So I have a lot of people that are there at Penn State. And then you got Jack Frack in the goal, who I'm definitely rooting for. So I'd like to see Penn State.
Penn State, Maryland play, and then the championship game. You clearly want Maryland to win.
Yeah.
Okay,
In a blowout.
in a blowout. In a blowout. You just spent 15 minutes talking about Till slowing the ball down in a blowout. I'd like for them to win by 100.
No, I would like to see a rematch of Penn State and Maryland for the 3rd time. It'll be tough. Yeah. Certainly tough to win that game, but they know each other so well. They've become kind of rivals. If you want to say that, obviously Hopkins is Maryland's rival, but Penn State and Maryland have really gotten after each other, and they've had some great success in the Big Ten as of recently, and they've had probably the most success in terms of going to the playoffs and into the Final Four. And so I think that would be a great matchup. However, and I don't want to see this happen, Cornell-Syracuse could be mind-blowing in terms of the amount of goals that can be scored.
Yeah, and that's where I think it not that I think it couldn't be Penn State, Syracuse, or Cornell, Maryland, or what you just said, but I think those are the 2 interesting matchups of who can get out of this weekend. I mean, clearly, everybody tune in this weekend. Now, what's interesting for you, because you've got a son playing for Maryland, you leave on Friday to head to the PLL camp because you're also the GM of the Chaos. So I'm going to be watching at home. You're going to be watching potentially at camp. Will Paul let you watch the games?
Of course.
I'm just joking. Sorry. If Maryland wins, you're clearly going to be like, I'm peacing out on Monday for a few hours, everybody.
Yeah, there is no way that I'm going to miss my son in his first national championship game. No chance. If they get there, I'm there.
First of all, I think that's awesome. So that leads me to say we're going to wrap up this week's episode of The Pocket. Next week, we get to talk about PLL camp. We're also going to talk about some of our St. James camps and some of the programming and some of all that fun stuff that Spencer and I are getting into here at the St. James. So you've picked Maryland. I'll pick Penn State.
Okay.
Okay. On the girls' side, you've picked Boston College. Just for fun, I'll pick North Carolina. I'll be fine. I'll be fine, everybody.
Either way, it's going to be a heck of a
And either
weekend.
way, it's going to be a great weekend for lacrosse, and we're going to talk about it next week at the beginning of the podcast, and then we can get into some fun PLL stuff as well as some WLL stuff that is also, they have that all-star game that's happening this year. They've just picked for it. They picked Rachel Clark. They picked the girl from Penn who I can't remember her name right now, but she's lights out. So
She the one that sucked the behind the back?
yes.
Yeah, she's good. She's really good.
So go enjoy some great lacrosse this weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Let's go.
Go Terps.